Hello, this is Adam Coffman, and this video will be something of a tribute to my late sister, Emilie, who passed away just over a month ago. She died on January 30th of this year, and there was initially a lot of questions about what happened to her. My sister was pretty healthy. There was no indication that she had anything seriously wrong with her health-wise. She was very active, very energetic. For some time, she'd been co-partners in a business that she was running in Zionsville, a bake shop, the Zionsville Bake Shop. And anyway, she passed away unexpectedly and tragically in her sleep. And as is necessary when the cause of death is unknown, they had to do an autopsy, and it took about a week, but they finally found out that Emilie died of a blood clot that was dislodged from her lung and went to her heart and killed her pretty much instantly. And so her lungs turned out to be full of blood clots. According to the medical examiner, some were very old, some were more recent. And this is a hereditary condition that our grandmother, our maternal grandmother, died of when she was fairly young. She was 55, and she passed away suddenly one day of the same thing. So Emilie had been screened for that. That had skipped my aunt and my mother, and it's just one of those things that happened tragically. And so I was able to speak for her at her memorial service, along with Steve Ranson, the minister who we had as we were growing up. I wanted to thank Steve again for being there that day. Some years back, I had gotten word that Steve Ranson had retired, and people say things nowadays, and words travel very quickly and often inaccurately. So if that was true, then Steve has turned out to be the most active retired minister that I've ever known. So Steve and his wife Kim have ministered faithfully to our family and to many other families as well for over 40 years now. So it was a blessing to have him there on February the 10th at Emilie's service to help me to speak for her as well. And he gave a fine eulogy. So that week that Emilie passed away, I was going through old pictures and pulling out the ones with Emilie in them. And when I say old pictures, I'm talking about pre-cell phone era stuff. So I was going through an actual box of old photographs and taking pictures of the pictures and setting them on my desk and going through them. And old photographs make us feel things, but they also make us think and make us remember, and sometimes remember things that we haven't thought about in a long time. And so I was sort of doing this to dive down into those old memories to find the treasure that was there. And there's so much, way too much to bring it all back to the surface to share. So I had to be very selective. And I had to corral all of these memories and emotions and thoughts into something simple that I could grab onto for a moment. Something that would help me narrow down the essence of who Emilie has always been, not just for me, but for everyone that she knew and loved. And as I was doing this, I kept coming back to one word. There was one word that kept intruding on my thoughts as I was thinking about her and remembering her. And I resisted it at first because as her brother, this is not a word that I would ever allow myself to entitle her with. But eventually I had to concede that it describes her better than any other word. And it's the word boss. Boss. Now, I know that's a generic word. It's a broad word. It can have a lot of meanings depending on the context. And I'm sure everyone who knew Emilie can find some resonance with how she embodied that word for you. For me, it has to do with the fact that because she was 13 months older than me, she did everything first as we were growing up. She went in front of me. She went ahead of me like a leader. She was really the first person I followed in life. She was the first visual example I had of how to navigate the world. All the adults were up above us, doing grown-up things. And Emilie was down on my level, showing me how to be a human. She was always one step ahead, always doing everything first. She walked first. She talked first. She learned how to use the toilet first. She was started kindergarten before me. She was baptized before me, married before me. I got to watch her do all of these things before I did. And now she has gone into eternity first. I just hope that she went ahead of me a little more than 13 months. But Emilie was my first leader, and she knew that very early on in our lives. She owned that responsibility. She always protected me, and she always stood up for me. She always had my best interests at heart, even when I was too stubborn to see it sometimes, and even when I would argue with her about things or fight with her, as brothers and sisters often do. But believe me when I tell you that even though I was always bigger than her, I still needed her protection when we were children. She saved me from getting beat up a number of times when we were kids. Our school had some bad dudes in it. Emilie's class in particular. Something happened in between the class of 1996 and 1997. I don't know what it was. I don't know if the government halted all experimentation after finishing up with her class or what, but her class was different from mine. We had a normal group of young boys in our class. Emilie's class did not have boys. It had grown men. In the 8th grade, they had some guys in her class looked like they had already done hard time or fought in Vietnam. Tough guys, really tough, and usually looking for an opportunity to get in a fight. And these guys, when they rumbled, they hurt people. I mean, there was blood in the road. Because I was always the biggest kid, the fat kid, I drew a lot of attention to myself without wanting to. And the thing about bullies is that most of them, probably got beat at home, where they had parents, dads that made them feel really small. So when they went to school and they saw me, that was an opportunity for them to try and act big, try and feel big. Start a fight with the biggest guy there, and you make yourself feel big. I think that's what a lot of them were thinking. But I never wanted to fight them. I would never fight them. I didn't know how to fight. I was a nerd. I was a geek. I just wanted to do my schoolwork and draw and play video games. And I mostly wanted other kids to leave me alone. And unfortunately, that didn't always happen. But my sister, however, she did not have the same disposition as me when it came to conflict. This one day in particular, I was maybe a junior in high school, maybe a sophomore. I can't remember exactly. Emilie was a year ahead of me, of course. And I was going to my locker between class periods to get a book out of the locker. And now my locker was next to a girl named Kylie Chastain, and very sweet girl. But Kylie at the time was dating one of the baddest dudes in school. His name was Jimmy. I didn't know Jimmy, but I knew his reputation, and nobody messed with Jimmy. The other bullies didn't mess with Jimmy. He was an apex predator in Cascade High School. Anyway, I was going to my locker, and Jimmy was there talking to Kylie, and he was kind of in my way, and had his back to me, and so I could barely reach my locker, and I was sort of reaching up over him to try and pull the book out, and of course it slipped and it hit Jimmy on the shoulder. And he immediately spun around and started cussing up a storm. First thought in his head was to go to fisticuffs. And I said, "Hey, Jimmy, I'm sorry, it just slipped." And that wasn't good enough. He didn't care. So he just hauled off and punched me as hard as he could in the stomach. And then he looked at me and he was just waiting for me to try and hit him back. He wanted to fight. And I said, "It was an accident. I am sorry." And I turned around, and as fast as I could, I walked away with my head down. I just went to class praying the whole time he wouldn't come after me. Because if he did, there's nothing I could do. So class goes by. After class, I have to go back to my locker. And there he is, waiting for me. I couldn't avoid him, so I walked up slowly. "Jimmy, it really was an accident. I didn't mean to drop my book on you." And then Jimmy said something to my utter amazement. He said, "No, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were Emilie's brother." Now, I don't know when exactly Jimmy had to deal with Emilie, whether it was in between those class periods or some other time earlier in our high school career. But at some point, Jimmy had met the boss. And that was the last time, to my recollection, something like that ever happened. But it was not the first. There was a collection of bad dudes stretching back to the first grade that, for reasons I could never quite grasp, guys had one by one cowered under the threat of my sister's wrath. Jimmy was just the last bully to discover that Emilie was not to be messed with, nor was anyone within her orbit of protection. Emilie was the boss. She was never satisfied with being a follower. She was a born leader. She always went first, and she cleared a path that made things usually easier for other people around her. She did a lot of that for me when we were young. But that was also something she did for everyone she loved who gave her the opportunity. Of course, she did that as a mother for Skylar and Neva, but also she did that as a wife for Jason. I remember the first time I saw Jason. I heard a car pull up in the driveway, and I looked out my bedroom window. It was either Emily's birthday or Valentine's Day, I'm not sure which, somewhere around 1998, 1999. And I saw this guy walking up to the front door, and he was dressed up really nice. He had flowers and chocolates and heart-shaped balloons, that sort of thing. And well, I don't know exactly how to put this, but Emilie had several boyfriends before, and none of them looked like this guy. So I went out into the hall to tell Emilie that there was a guy coming to the door, and I said to her something like, "This schmuck, this putz ain't gonna make the cut." Oh, how wrong I was. I was wrong, and I'm glad that I was. I'm glad that Emilie and Jason found each other. Jason has always been there for her. She found a good husband. He gave her the space and the support to be herself and to put her gifts to use and flex her muscles in life. And to be the boss, to be the leader. He's always been there supporting her as she moved ahead with a dream that she had had for many, many years. As anyone who knew her knows, Emilie loved to cook and bake, but she loved it even more if she could share that gift with other people. And Jason helped her to do that. And he helped her to do that well. He's loved her unceasingly, brought two beautiful daughters into the world with her, and has faithfully stood by her all those many years. 24 years is a long time to be married nowadays in the world that we live in. It's a long time, but it was not long enough. It wasn't enough time. Time is an interesting fact of life. It's the great transformer of things. It changes almost everything. It dissolves things that we think are solid. It moves things that we think will always be there. It destabilizes, shakes, and decays everything around us. Eventually, time will take every one of us by the hand and walk us into the grave. And yet, for all the terrible things it does to us, time is a precious gift from God. Emilie knew something about that too. Even back when we were really young. I have lots of memories to draw upon, many little interactions that shaped our childhoods and our minds. But there's one in particular that stands out now. It's one of those little treasures that I want to bring up to the surface. When we were pretty young, around 10 and 11, I believe, Emilie came into my room one day and she pulled me away from my video games or whatever I was doing. And she had a tape in her cassette player. And she wanted me to hear one of the songs on it. We always shared our music with each other when we were kids. If she heard something that she really liked, she would get excited to share it with me and vice versa. And this song is actually, it's an Amy Grant song. I know that may seem cheesy to a lot of us now, but that was the tape. It was a tape called Lead Me On. And there was a song that she played, and I want to share some of the lyrics from that song. They go like this. We were young, and none of us knew quite what to say, but the feeling moved among us, in silence anyway. Slowly, we had made quite a change. Somewhere we had crossed a big line. Down upon our knees we had tasted holy wine. And no one could sway us in a lifetime, not a word. And no one had to say we were changed. Nothing else we lived through would ever be the same, knowing the truth that we had gained. Purer than the sky behind the rain, falling down all around us, calling out from a boundless love. Love had lit a fire and we were the flame, curling into the darkness, shining out from inside us. Emilie and I, especially when we were young, often communicated to each other most clearly through the shared appreciation of art forms, music, and books, even comic books, and movies. So I knew even all those years ago that Emilie played that song for me because the words that she was hearing were important to her. They conveyed an idea that she wanted to, in turn, convey to me. Those words were what she wanted to say to me. She just didn't know how to say it herself, but she found this song that could do it for her. And the words of this song are beautiful, and they are poetic, but they mean something really important. The song is about being transformed, and being transformed into the image of God. It's about how God's love and truth change us and make us into the people that we are meant to be on this earth. It's about being emptied of our brokenness and our pain, and in exchange being so filled with the light and the love and the truth of God that we cannot contain it, and so it has to be shared. It has to shine out into the darkness and then into all of eternity. It's about how we all have gifts. And no matter how many years we are given down here, we have to use those gifts because time is short. We have to make our years count, and Emilie made her years count. As I said, Emilie was always a step ahead of me when we were kids. Even at that age, passing along something so seemingly small and fleeting, just words from a song, but still conveying an idea that was of monumental importance. An idea that was just a seed she planted in the mind of her little brother 35 years ago. But here it is today, bearing some fruit. It's really simple. Love God, love people, seek the truth, use your gifts and talents and abilities, and keep moving forward. That's what that song is about, and that's what makes someone a boss no matter what you do in life. The boundless love of God has lit a fire, and you are the flame. So I'm going to close with this poem I want to share. It's a poem I wrote some years ago, and I read this for my dad about 1.5 years ago when he passed away. I didn't think I'd ever be reading it for Emilie, but I want to, because it puts a tragic loss like this in its proper perspective. And that's all we can really do about death when we think about it. We can't do anything to stop it. We can't do anything to stop death, but we can talk about it in its proper perspective. And we can do that because we have a Savior who did the heavy lifting by putting death in its place. We're going to celebrate her. We are going to remember her. We will cry. We will hurt. We will miss her. But in the right perspective, it's not the end. And Emilie knew that. She didn't just go ahead of me. She's gone ahead of all of us who seek the King. If only for this life, if only for this life we have hope in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied. But Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. In other words, in the grand scheme of the cosmos, death is only a nap. It's only a nap. It's just a time of rest until we rise again, as Christ has done before us. And all the heavens and the earth, everything we see in nature, it was all created in such a way to tell us this truth. Every night we lay down to sleep, swimming into darkness, swimming into blindness. And each morning we rise again, waking into light, waking into sight. That's death and resurrection. Every day the sun goes down to sleep. It spins below the western sky. It reminds us that without it, we would die. And each morning it rises again. Out of the east it blazes, while the birds stand to attention and sing its praises. That's death and resurrection. Every fall, the leaves, the flowers, the gardens all sleep. Their beauty and majesty no one can save, as autumn takes them into the grave. But after a season, they rise again. Spring calls them forth from the soil and the sap, and they wake again from winter's nap. That's death and resurrection. Every year the ants, the bees, and the spiders all sleep. They burrow deep into the ground. They hide away and cannot be found. But when the cold has passed, they come out again. They pour forth in droves greater than before, and they remind us that there's always some more. That's death and resurrection. Even the caterpillar is no exception. They hatch, they eat, and before too soon, they spin for themselves a brilliant cocoon. And after a spell, they rise again. They emerge from the tomb in which they curled like eagles with new wings unfurled. That's death and resurrection. The farmers in the fields know it all too well. They see the truth that Jesus has spoken. Unless a seed falls to the ground and gets broken, it remains alone, just one kernel. But if that seed dies and gets plowed, it can produce a crop to feed a crowd. That's death and resurrection. It's even in many of the stories we tell and the movies we watch. Superman, Spider-Man, Picard, and Captain Jack, they've all died. They've all come back. Like Thanos and the Avengers, half the earth had kicked the can until Robert Downey Jr. said, "I am Iron Man." That's death and resurrection. Like all these things, like the seed in the ground, like my mom and my dad and my sister now too, we also will go. We will give up our spirits and retire to the soil with no more breath, no more toil. And then one day, only the Father knows when, we will, like all the earth, come back again. At the end of time, we will all awake and will all be called to answer for the choices we make. We will have to reckon with what we did. Did we listen? Did we believe? Did we follow his path? Did we get baptized or did we just take a bath? It's up to us to give up our lives to the Lord who did his work to save all of us from a permanent grave. He left us his words. He gave us a plan to seek the truth, to love each other, to love the lost, to tell all creation that he has paid the cost so that we too can live once more in an eternal home forevermore. Emilie Ann has just fallen asleep. She laid down her head and off she went. Her spirit was strong, but her body was spent. Yet like the old hymn says, hallelujah, by and by, she just flew away. 46 years she walked this earth, 1977 to 2024. But now at last, for eternity to soar. On wings like eagles, she will run and not grow weary. She will walk and not be faint.